Okay. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar today on economic consulting and financial litigation with Andrew Wong, a managing principal at Analysis Group. As we're waiting for everyone to join, feel free to write your name, school, and grade, and why you registered for this event in the chat, and then we'll get started. Well, as everyone does that, I can provide a brief overview of the club. The Junior Economic Club of Chicago was founded in 2014. We're an entirely student-run 501c3 nonprofit. We provide our members with opportunities for business exposure with a three-faceted approach of quarterly forums, weekly workshops, and community initiatives. We fully fund membership for 150 of Chicago's most ambitious students with free opportunities to explore business and economics in their community. And with that, I'll hand it over to Nikita.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nikita Agrawal, and I'm the Assistant Financial Officer of the Junior Economic Club of Chicago. If you have any questions for our speaker during the event, please privately chat them to me and indicate whether you would like to ask the question live or have it asked anonymously. So with us today, we have Dr. Andrew Wong, the Managing Principal at Analysis Group. A specialist in finance and securities, Dr. Wong has managed teams supporting academic and industry affiliates in litigation matters involving securities fraud, damages, bankruptcy, suitability analysis, portfolio management, mortgage lending practices, accounting analysis, market manipulation, and financial statement analysis. He has extensive experience analyzing fixed income instruments, structured finance instruments, and credit derivatives. Dr. Wong has worked on and provided testimony in government regulatory investigations. His recent engagements include work in legal disputes related to structured finance instruments, securities lending, mutual funds and other commingled investment pools, corporate governance, and investment suitability claims. He has also worked on valuation, class certification, and intellectual property matters. Dr. Wong joined Analysis Group from Chicago Partners in 2006 and has played an instrumental role in the development and growth of the firm's Chicago practice. He is a member of the American Finance Association and has published research on bankruptcy and the financing of new firms. Dr. Wong is a board member of 1 Million Degrees, a Chicago-based nonprofit organization. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Andrew Wong.
Hi, everyone. So is it my turn? Can I share my slides now, Nikita? Oh, great. You figure I'd be used to using Zoom. I'm a little slow on Zoom, so give me a second here. Hold on.
Oh, and I'd just like to encourage everyone to have their cameras on and participate in this meeting today, since I think Dr. Wong has an interactive presentation prepared.
So this is going to be interactive. I'm going to ask you guys some questions as we go through this. I think you guys can all see my screen, right? Or at least see a slide. So let me give you an introduction to who I am, and then we'll talk about what I do at Analysis Group. So just some background. I grew up in Boston, but I've been in Chicago for a long time since. I went to U of C, and I have an undergrad degree in math. I decided to go straight into getting a PhD in finance. Since then, I was, as Nikita said, I was with another group weirdly called Chicago Partners, but I was actually in New York for the time before I moved back to help start the Chicago office of Analysis Group. So a little bit about what we do at Analysis Group, and I'll go into this more in depth and how kind of we use economics to solve, I would say, like empirical everyday questions. I have an iPhone. I assume most of you guys have phones. So we are involved in primarily disputes or litigation matters involving products. So in this case, and let me turn off my flashlight here. One of the disputes happened to be between an iPhone, Apple, which is made by Apple, and Samsung, which makes a Galaxy phone. One of the contentions there was, why do people buy phones? So I'm going to ask a few people here. I see participants on the screen. So I'm going to ask, I'm going to call on people. So Andrew, I'm assuming you have a phone, Andrew. Yes, yeah, you're nodding your head. Why'd you buy your phone?
I mean, I think the original idea back when I got it was like communication with my parents, but it's, I mean, evolved into like a social tool, I guess.
Okay. Jason, what about you? I see Jason Schachter.
Yeah, pretty similar reasons. I started with this tiny little like prepaid phone that was just for like calling my parents. And then once I got an actual smartphone, it turned into entertainment and social media and a whole sort of thing.
I'm not judging you for your TikTok videos, but one of the things we worked on here was that Apple sued Samsung for rounded corners. You see, if you have an iPhone, you have a rounded corner, and Samsung Galaxies used to have a square corner. So our job was to value how much a rounded corner is worth to a cell phone. So as you guys, as Andrew and Jason have already said, a rounded versus square corner wasn't high on your list of things you thought about when you bought a phone, right? So what we were able to do was look and run experiments where we had eye tracking software when we presented consumers ads for cell phones, and they would look, and then we'd track their eyes, see how many of them, first of all, responded that shape was important to them. And then specifically corners were important. But when we looked at eye tracking software, we were able then to say, did they actually look at the corners? Do they care about that? Or do they care about the fact that, there's a home screen or there's a speaker or cameras in back? And so using that kind of information, we were able to build up a model to actually value how much a rounded corner is worth to Apple. And believe it or not, it's not worth much when you compare it to other things like the camera, the functionality, the features, the other things it could do. So that's basically what we do at Analysis Group. We look at, we use economic tools, such as the ones you guys may have already learned, but certainly we'll learn in college and in grad school if you decide to go to get a graduate degree in economics, to try to address problems that happen primarily in litigation, but I would like to say like everyday problems. So economics doesn't necessarily restrict itself to just addressing, supply and demand equations or pricing pork belly futures or something like that. Economics, I would say, from the days of like Gary Becker, for example, tools in economics have been used to address a lot of interesting questions. And that's what we do in Analysis Group. For example, the tools that in economics have been used to investigate whether or not to go for it on fourth down. I know it's Sunday today, so many of you guys are waiting for me to stop talking so you guys can go watch some football. But, more coaches nowadays are going for it on fourth down. And a lot of that stemmed from a paper written by David Romer, who showed using economic tools and differential equations why people should go for it more on fourth down. Relatedly, in football, an Analysis Group, I'm going to pick on somebody else here. Leo, do you follow football?
No.
No. All right. Then we'll pick on Josh. Josh Cohen, do you follow football?
Yeah, only my team.
Only your team. So who is your team?
The Packers.
Oh, okay. But you follow football enough to know who's the greatest of all time. I'm guessing.
Tom Brady.
Tom Brady. What was Tom Brady accused of a few years ago?
Deflating the footballs to get a better grip during a rainy game.
Right. That's actually a case that Analysis Group worked on. We worked on behalf of Tom and did some analytics on the science behind whether or not his footballs were inflated or not, and whether or not that was actually an advantage. So we were, again, none of us are trained, whatever physicists, pressure scientists, or whatever they are, but we were able to use economic tools to help answer that question. We're not successful. He was suspended for 4 games, but I think he came back and won a Super Bowl. So I think it worked out well for Tom. We do a lot of work working primarily in law. The questions we answer involved such as what is the impact between two companies? So for example, if American Airlines and JetBlue, for example, are undergoing antitrust investigations now by the US government as to whether or not their alliance will make things anti-competitive. Will it drive up prices? Way back before I think many of you guys were born, Microsoft was accused of acting anti-competitively and driving up prices and hurting consumers. Now, Google is being accused of the same thing, as well as Apple. So we address antitrust issues. We look at questions such as, I talked a little bit about the iPhone, but another set of questions that we looked at involve, who else am I going to pick off? Should I pick on people that don't have their camera on? Let's see what happens when I pick on Jasper. Jasper, you out there?
Yeah.
Do you know what a Nintendo is?
Yeah, it's a gaming device.
Cool. Do you own a Nintendo?
I don't believe so. Not anymore, I don't think.
So did you own a Wii? Is that why? And you didn't decide to get a Switch?
Yeah, I did own a Wii a long time ago. But,
okay, so you know what a Wii is, right? They had the motion control thing.
Yeah.
How much do you think that's worth to Nintendo? A lot? A little? Do you think that's been the primary driver of Nintendo's success?
Yeah, I think it was a pretty large catalyst in a lot of their success.
More than Super Mario or the games and the other things?
Well, I thought that was all incorporated, so maybe.
Maybe. So that's one of the things that we were tasked to do, working with Nintendo. Somebody sued Nintendo because they claimed they have a patent over the motion control and said that was responsible for the entirety of Nintendo's success. And we had to ask the question, okay, relative to other things that Nintendo did, ranging from Super Mario to, I think, Pokemon or Zelda, I don't know these Nintendo games, what is the value of the motion control versus the other intellectual property that Nintendo had? So we those are the questions we address. Personally, within finance, I look at how portfolios are composed. I look at stock drops. I look at stock price reactions to things. I investigate foreign exchange. These are the questions that I do within finance. Again, the question being, is there an economic way to answer this question? Can we measure things? Can we use the economic tools that we've developed to kind of attribute, what was the role of the banks in the housing crisis? Were loans given out to really subprime people that didn't deserve loans? So those are the things that I was responsible for working on, and I had a large part working on. We do this work with a lot of experts in the industry. I think Austin Goolsby spoke to you guys some time ago. Austin is an affiliate of Analysis Group, and we've worked with professors like Austin to work on this testimony to kind of look at the data and address certain questions with respect to the data. So I'm going to go into like one last case example and then open it up to just general questions. So one of the things we were asked to do, and this is on Apple's website, is measure the economic impact of Apple. Specifically, how many jobs does Apple create? A few years ago, Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, was under a lot of scrutiny. And actually, people were questioning, okay, you've got all these products. Are you hoarding profits? Are you actually doing anything to help create jobs in the United States and around the world? So our job was to go ahead and help Apple try to count the number of jobs it created. Some of this counting is pretty straightforward and pretty easy, right? You could just look at Apple's employment and start counting people. Well, 12 people work at the Apple store in Lincoln Park. That's 12. 30 people work at the Apple store in Michigan Ave downtown. Well, 12 plus 30. So that's easy. That's the direct employment. But what about the indirect employment? What about jobs created through the App Store or jobs created through, even what's known as first removed multipliers? Apple gave us its checkbook, basically every dime it spent over a couple of years, and we were able to figure out how many jobs it created. So for example, Apple spends so much on tuna fish in its cafeterias that it is responsible for employing at least one tuna fisherman in Alaska every year. That's purely because of Apple's consumption of tuna fish. We look at all the app stores, and if you go to Apple's website, and you'll see a much better breakdown of this. We broke it down by state. We broke down that certain apps lead to more employments, and we used economic multipliers to figure all this out. So we didn't exactly sit there and call every single app. We didn't call Epic Games and ask Fortnite, no, how many people do you employ? We're able to use economic tools to make those estimates and use statistics to make those estimates as well. So I've spoken for long enough now, and I'm gonna stop talking to let you guys answer questions. Ask questions, sorry, not answer questions.
Great, thank you. So our first question is, how does Analysis Group differentiate itself from its competitors?
I think it's twofold. I think our competitors, we have a number in Chicago, but we have some around the globe as well. I think it's the quality of the people we work with. I think, you know, for example, in Austin Goolsby, who have, in case you don't know who Austin is, Austin's currently a professor at the University of Chicago, but before he was the head of the Council of Economic Advisors under President Obama for a number of years. They come to us when they want top-notch work done by people who are experienced economists, but also work with top people in the field like Austin. We work with, so not that we only work with Democrats per se, we work with Glenn Hubbard, who was, used to be dean at Columbia's Business School, but Glenn used to be George Bush's chief economic advisor as well. We work with people who have run large corporations like Credit Suisse and Merrill Lynch. So we get that industry point of view too. We work with professors who have published research. We work with Nobel Prize winners. And for example, we work with Jean Tirole, Oliver Hart, Bob Engel. And so people come to us for that kind of top-notch research ability that we have to answer their difficult questions.
Yes, thank you. So I think you touched on this a bit when comparing companies competitively, but in the bankruptcy court, how is intellectual property valued?
Wow, that's a tough question. You're not going easy here, are you? I think IP is generally valued in a number of ways. I think one of the things that people look at would be kind of a counterfactual or but for use, or kind of if you can design around this. So let me give you an example here. One of the cases I worked on in the past happened to involve telephony. I'm sure you guys have picked up a phone, dialed some 1-800 number, and it says push 3 if you want to be connected to the operator, press 4 if you want your bank balance, press 5 if you want to be connected to this, this, and this. Somebody owned the patent to that. Some guy patented this, what's called automated telephony. So when he kind of bought the patent, he didn't think anything of it really, because telephones weren't as sophisticated as they were back then. But as you know, basically every major corporation who has a customer service bureau uses automated telephony. Then he started suing people because they were using his quote unquote intellectual property without permission. And so our job was to value how much his patent was worth. Well, one of the ways we did it was looking at a design around. That is, okay, if we didn't have this technology, if we didn't have this patent technology where you could press 3 to get the, you know, your bank balance, press 4 to get your stock price, how would you do that? Well, one way is to design around with operators. And this is well before your history, but operators used to connect people using wires. Like, you know, you physically talk to someone and she would push some buttons or plug a wire in and you'd be connected to Leo, who is in accounts receivable. You're connected to Jason, who can tell you your bank balance. So we would value it as, okay, if you didn't have this technology, you'd have to employ all these people. You'd have to pay all these people and get the infrastructure and to plug all these lines in. So that's the one way we did with valuation.
Great, thank you. So another question that we have is, could you give an overview of some of the financial instruments that you work with at Analysis Group?
Sure. Right now, I'm involved in matters that involve credit default swaps, repos, obviously debt and equity, but even the debt gets sophisticated. It ranges from convertible debt to bank loans, privately placed debt. We do all sorts of work involving, you know, foreign exchange instruments as well, other kinds of swaps, interest rate swaps. So one of the neat things of consulting is that I'm not relegated into doing the same thing all the time. So I do end up touching a number of different areas and just having to learn a lot about them as I go along. In schooling, hopefully you only go to school for a certain amount of time. You can't learn everything at that time. What happens is that you get a toolbox, which allows you to kind of learn things quicker or rely on your first principles to go ahead and learn on the fly, if you will.
Great, thank you. So we now have a question from Pranette. If you'd like to unmute.
Yeah, so you said corporate litigation firms and the analytics groups you work at, they do a lot of research for companies and they help consult. Do you think academic research in academia, would that be an important prerequisite for finding a career here, or?
Yeah, so I mean, in our staff and analysis group, it's broken up. We have analysts who come straight out of college. Usually they have degrees in math, statistics, economics. And then we have professional staff, such as associates, managers, all the way up to partners, who have graduate degrees. They either have an MBA, a PhD, or some other master's degree, which gives them a tool set to do more sophisticated analytics. One of the reasons we like that is because much of our work does tie in tightly to academics. Many of our experts are academia. In litigation, you have to use techniques that have been peer researched and published. You can't just make something up and say, oh, that gave me a valid answer. No, you have to use things like regression that's been published in peer research journals, peer-reviewed journals, and peer-reviewed articles as the basis to come up for an opinion or come up with an answer. And so these techniques that you learn in graduate school and are employed in academic research are very helpful and useful in what we do. So I'm sure like right now, many of you guys have heard of machine learning or data analytics and big data. That's actually becoming a bigger and bigger part of what we do as we use those tools that we've borrowed from data science that have been published in academic data science articles to address some of our questions. Because as you imagine, we have voluminous amounts of data now that, back when I was in grad school, I could do a regression by hand, but now we have terabytes of data. There's no way anything can be done by hand now. And so we need to use these kind of new tools to address these questions with larger data sets. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so our next question is from Sohan. If you'd like to unmute and ask.
Oh, yeah. So I guess what's the extent to the types of problems people have kind of come to analysis group with that you've been able to solve with kind of the things you guys do?
Extent, that's kind of an interesting question. Sometimes, let me take the example of Apple and the jobs search research that we did for them. Apple has internal economics group, a data research group, and they didn't know how really to approach the problem. So they came to us. They actually call it Apple University. There's a bunch of academic economists that run Apple University, actually. And their internal group came to us and say, hey, can you think of ideas of how to measure this? They started, it's easy just to sit there and count the number of people that work at Apple stores or work at Cupertino and things like that. But they wanted a little bit more than that, because I think that the central question was, what is Apple's impact on the economy, particularly the US economy? And so by just counting the people that work directly for Apple, that undercounted the actual impact. So what we did there was think with them and kind of go through the different techniques available, again, tying back to the earlier question on academic research. Well, what you could do is look at tier one multipliers, right? So if you spend X amount of dollars in this field, usually this means, this means $4 of employment, et cetera. And that's how we got to, for example, the one tuna fisherman, because they spent so much, this would mean that at least one fisherman would need to be employed. That's the way we kind of approach the problem for Apple.
Yeah, that sounds very interesting. So we now have a question from Andrew.
Hello. I was just wondering sort of what a typical day of work looks like, and how, I know you touched on it earlier, but how the relationship aspect with other people connects
Sure.
to your typical day and kind of how that plays out.
Sure. I think the typical day is different for a lot of people in the analysis group, depending on what level you are. I have unfortunately become too senior to be of any use at all. I mean, what I love to do and why I got into economics and why I have a PhD in finance is because I still do. I like playing with data. I like programming and getting results, getting data to analyze a question. That's primarily done now by analysts and associates, people who, I'm 46 years old. I graduated grad school well before I hope most of you were born. And so the techniques now that are available, such as machine learning or other data science techniques, that wasn't something that was taught to me in graduate school. So for me to learn that, unfortunately, would just be a nightmare. It's like asking, I have kids your age. They help me with my iPhone. And so what happens is that the analysts and associates are the ones that do a lot of the data work. So their typical day will be either finding data sets to help answer questions or do some programming, doing some qualitative research into academic papers or other documents that could be helpful here. And we work together in teams. So the junior folks who are kind of in the details will get together with people like me and discuss results. Like, for example, they'll run a regression and we'll have questions with the regression. They'll propose results. We'll all sit together and kind of propose answers and think of different ways to address questions. Even with experts, so I'll tell you one situation here. We had a case that involved music streaming and assessing royalties with respect to music streaming. In particular, the accusation was that, I'm going to use some people on the screen here, that Leo sampled Andrew's music, but didn't give him credit. And now Andrew is suing Leo saying, look, your entire album, the success of your entire album was due to Leo and Leo's 5-second bar that you sampled. Well, in those cases, with an expert, they may know something about music, but quite frankly, in this case, this expert didn't know anything about sampling. It's like, okay, what is this sampling? Why they borrow music? Why can't they write it? How frequently does this happen? And then we, the younger members of the team were able to bring in their ideas. Well, it happens all the time. This is kind of the royalty arrangement when Kanye samples Daft Punk, for example. When Pharrell does this, he pays X, Y, and Z. So that kind of knowledge in the team gives us different ways to approach problems and adds to the kind of idea set that we end up exploring.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And Leo would never steal from Andrew. Don't worry about it.
Yes, I think that's a very interesting way of how members of an analysis group are sort of pulled in all different directions to compete and analyze the different industries related to litigation matters. So now we have a question from Leo.
Yeah, so I was kind of wondering, if you could tell us a bit about how the pandemic has affected your work, the sorts of problems people come to you with.
Sure. I think there's a direct effect with respect to our work in that most of our work is centralized around the courtroom. And in March of 2000, when the world shut down, courts also shut down. There were no in-person hearings, judges were not hearing cases. And so work for us came to a standstill, and for our competitors came to pretty much a standstill during that time. I think within a few months, as people got used to working from home and figured out this kind of new normal, work picked back up. There was the backlog of casework that we had to do, but also a lot of interesting new cases as a result of the pandemic as well. So for example, we worked on cases where certain cruise ships weren't sailing as a result of the pandemic. Well, who's responsible for that? Did insurance cover the lost revenue to the cruise ship? Is this a risk that the cruise ship should have known about? And in addition to that, how much lost revenue is there? Can you quantify that? We also dealt with other issues such as, let's suppose two companies wanted to merge. Let's suppose Jason's company wanted to merge with Josh's company, but Josh's company does something that is materially affected as a result of the pandemic. Well, Jason no longer wants to merge with Josh because that's a bad investment now. That he's going to want to get out of it. So is the pandemic a reason to get out of it? Is that a material adverse event that could cause the merger to break up. And so as a result of the pandemic, as a result of COVID, we've had a lot of kind of new types of work come up. That's been pretty interesting in that way.
Yeah, thank you for expanding on that.
Yeah, so our next question is about your experience studying at UChicago. I think UChicago is a school that everybody is well acquainted with. It's so local. So yeah, could you talk more about that?
Sure. Where do I start? So I grew up in Boston and New Hampshire. I went to University of Chicago initially, and this is in 1992, because I wanted to be far away from my parents. That literally was probably the first and foremost reason to go this way. When I went to the University of Chicago, I thought I was just going to major in economics and be done with it. It's something that, as you guys in high school, I really was passionate about and something I really enjoyed. But when I got to U of C, they made me take placement tests just to figure out what level I placed into. And I didn't do as well as I thought I would do in math. And so I had to take a first year, calculus, honors calculus class there. But I loved it. I fell in love with math. And I continued to take more math classes, and they actually were more enjoyable than, quite frankly, my economics classes at that time. And so I decided as an undergrad to major in math. Serendipitously, it ended up being a great decision, because when I finished my undergrad degree, I thought about getting a job on Wall Street, I think was where I was looking at, or continuing on my education to get a PhD. I still liked economics enough and thought the PhD level economics classes would be interesting, more interesting than the undergrad ones, and they turned out to be, yes, they were more interesting. But in order to kind of get into a PhD program, or one of the top PhD programs, they really looked at your mathematical ability and your math background. A lot of what economics now is centered around is just the ability to kind of look at sophisticated models, to use sophisticated empirical methods or statistical methods to look at data sets. So having that math background, which I never intended to get, really helped me get into grad school, but also thrive in grad school. And so I continued on to grad school. Grad school was not easy. I'll tell you that. It wasn't too much fun either for a lot of it, until we got to the part where I was able to write my dissertation. I was able to do research on areas that I enjoyed doing and focusing on. After grad school, I thought about going into academia. I had some academic job offers. They were all on the West Coast. My girlfriend at the time was East Coast. This is a lot of information now. And I decided not to do academia and decided to do an industry job. And then flash forward 20 years and here I am talking to you guys.
Great, thank you. So Pranat has a question.
Sure.
Yeah, so you said you work with a lot of big corporations. My question is, are these primarily like public or private entities? And if you do work with both, what would you say is like the main difference between working with a privately owned one versus a publicly owned corporation?
Let me start with Analysis Group itself, and then I'll go to my clients. I think Analysis Group itself, we're privately owned, and many of our competitors are actually publicly traded. The difference between the two, I think, is that in a publicly traded firm, you're held accountable to your outside shareholders. You're held, and they're investing in you because they're interested in your quarterly earnings statement, your revenue statements, and making sure you hit certain targets. And so you have to be consciously conscious of those things. And that may drive you to do work or take cases that you may not otherwise. So at Analysis Group, one of the great things I enjoy about being at a privately held corporation is that we can make decisions without just hitting a quarterly earnings announcement. That's really not important to us. So for example, we don't take cases on behalf of tobacco companies. We don't take cases on behalf of gun manufacturers. We can do a lot of pro bono work, for example. These are things that if we were publicly traded, we'd be more scrutinized for. Like, why did you turn down this revenue? Why are you doing things for free? I think, we don't have to address those questions and justify ourselves. Within my clients, there's, I think at the heart of it, little difference between publicly traded versus private clients. I know that some of the private clients tend to be smaller, but they actually tend to have a lot more interesting problems too. let me take that back. There was one primary difference. Again, this has to do with disclosure. Where publicly traded firms, they have disclosure requirements as a result of being publicly traded, such as the SEC, by the SEC or other regulators. Privately held firms don't have those requirements. But I think the questions at the end of the day, they can be interesting because privately held firm or because they're publicly traded firms. Like, for example, right now, we're working on behalf of some venture capital firms, which are, not publicly traded, and they have some interesting problems of their own that for me personally, I find, very engaging.
Great, thank you. So our next question, I know you spoke about this a little bit of how instrumental math was in your career, but do you have any other advice for high school students interested to pursue a career in economics?
I think it's to read a lot. I mean, just reading the newspaper every day, you kind of pick up things and pick up terminology. At the end of the day, much of what economics and finance and all this stuff, much of it is still based on first principles, right? Demand slopes down. When you increase the price of something, people are going to buy less of that. So these first principles of economics, what makes things different and what is basically syntax, right? What we say in syntax, in finance may be different than agricultural economics, may be different than antitrust economics, but it's still the same basic concepts, the same basic principles of economics. So I think just reading a lot of newspapers to get yourself more acquainted about issues out there, and also but the syntax of how people talk about things. So then you can kind of map these first principles into the different syntax and context, I think would be useful. Obviously, I think math and having a background there is pretty useful, but also reading some of the literature to figure out what part of economics you're interested in is essential. Even when I started in college in '92, economics was still a pretty big field, but now it's exploded. When you think about people like Stephen Levitt, who wrote Freakonomics, I think you guys probably are all familiar. He's using economic tools to address problems that have nothing to do with like financial or economic markets, right? You look at someone like Emily Oster doing the same thing. I talked a little bit about, David Romer talking about fourth down in football. It's just figuring out how you can use tools and then figuring out different situations where these social science tools can be applied. So I think that'd be useful too, just reading literature like Freakonomics to help spur ideas of where you could, apply economic tools or areas that might be interesting to you.
Great, thank you. That was some really good advice. So yeah, it looks like that's towards the end of our event.
Yeah, so thank you all for coming. Thank you, Dr. Wong, for...
By the way, Alan Sanderson taught me sports economics at the University of Chicago way back when. He's super fun.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. Yeah, so we have 2 upcoming events, Sports Economics with Alan Sanderson and the Next Generation of Lending with Himel Agarwal. So be sure to sign up for those. Sports Economics is actually an in-person event held at the U Chicago campus. And yeah, thank you again for coming today. Thank you, Dr. Wong, for your presentation. And we look forward to seeing you all at our upcoming events.